My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I believed keeping the peace was the same thing as being strong. I thought being the bigger person meant swallowing hurt feelings. I thought family deserved endless chances. Most of all, I thought I was protecting my son. I was wrong. The moment that finally shattered that illusion happened on a warm summer evening around my parents' dining table, when my older sister Michelle stopped my son and said, "No seat for brats. This table is for the good ones." Something inside me broke. Not cracked. Not bent. Broke. It wasn't even the sentence itself. It was the smile on her face when she said it. The way she looked at her own children afterward. Like they were all sharing a joke. Like Liam wasn't a child standing there holding a plate. Like he was entertainment. Her sons burst out laughing immediately. Noah repeated the word, "Brat," then laughed harder. Liam just stood there, quiet, still, holding his plate with both hands. He didn't ask what he did wrong. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. Somehow that hurt more. I looked around the table. My father kept eating. My mother took another sip of iced tea. Michelle's husband stared down at his food. Nobody said a word. Nobody told her to stop. Nobody defended my son. That silence was louder than anything Michelle had said. I pulled out the chair beside me. "Sit here, sweetheart." Liam nodded and sat down. The dinner continued. Conversations resumed. Dessert was served. Coffee was poured. Everyone acted as though nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I sat there smiling politely, while something dark and heavy settled into my chest. Because the truth was, this wasn't new. Michelle had been doing versions of this for years. She hated that Liam was different. My son was thoughtful, creative, sensitive. He spent afternoons drawing strange little robots and inventing stories for them. He talked to plants, named them, sometimes read books during family gatherings because crowds overwhelmed him. To me, those things made him special. To Michelle, they made him a target. Her children were loud, competitive, always shouting, always wrestling, always grabbing attention. She called it confidence. When Liam stayed quiet, she called him rude. When he brought books, she called him antisocial. When he became overwhelmed and needed space, she called him spoiled. And every time, I made excuses. "She's joking." She doesn't mean it. She's stressed. I told those lies so often I almost believed them myself. The truth was far uglier. I wasn't protecting Liam. I was teaching him to tolerate disrespect. Teaching him that family members were allowed to hurt him. Teaching him that kindness meant staying silent. That night, after I tucked him into bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes. Not sadness. Not anger. Resignation. As if he already expected to be treated that way. That realization made me physically sick. I sat down at my computer and opened a reservation confirmation. A week-long beachfront resort vacation. Ocean views. Pools. Kids' activities. Everything Michelle had been bragging about for months. My credit card was attached to the booking because Michelle couldn't qualify for it herself. She had begged me to help, promised she'd pay me back. She never did. Not once. I stared at the screen. The cancellation button sat in the corner. One click away. For a long moment I hesitated. Then I remembered Liam, standing with his plate. I remembered the laughter. I remembered the silence. I clicked. The reservation disappeared. The cancellation fee was enormous. I didn't care. 3 days later, the morning Michelle and her family were supposed to leave, my phone buzzed. A text message. "What time do we check in? The kids are excited." I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then I typed 2 words. "You don't." Nothing else. A few hours later, my phone exploded. Calls, texts, voicemails. Michelle screaming, calling me selfish, cruel, heartless. She said I ruined her children's dream vacation. She said I was punishing innocent kids. She said I had lost my mind. Then she called our parents. And suddenly the story wasn't about Liam anymore. It was about poor Michelle. Poor Michelle, whose vacation had been stolen. Poor Michelle, whose children were crying. Poor Michelle, who had a horrible sister. She moved fast. She always did. Within days, extended relatives were hearing her version. The version where I had become arrogant because my business was finally successful. The version where I hated seeing her happy. The version where she had done absolutely nothing wrong. And the worst part? People believed it. Weeks later, I learned there had been a family barbecue at my parents' house. Everyone attended. Everyone except me and Liam. No invitation. No explanation. Just exclusion. My mother continued sending inspirational quotes as if everything was normal. One read, "Pride destroys families." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. For years, I had been the family member people called whenever they needed something. Money, help, advice, babysitting. I was useful. But usefulness isn't the same thing as being valued. Michelle had always been the favorite daughter. She stayed close to home, married young, had children early, showed up every Sunday, looking exactly how my parents thought a successful woman should look. I was different. I moved away, built a company from scratch, raised Liam alone. Somewhere along the way, I became the outsider, the family member who was tolerated but never truly seen. I still hoped things would calm down. I still believed my parents would eventually ask what really happened. They never did. One evening, I called my father. I asked if we could talk. His voice was cold from the moment he answered. He told me I owed Michelle an apology. I asked if he knew what she said to Liam. There was a long pause. Then he sighed. "Michelle's under a lot of stress, Evelyn. You take everything too personally." Those words changed something inside me, because in that moment, I understood. They knew. They always knew. They just didn't care enough to stop it. After that phone call, I stopped trying. No dramatic announcement. No angry social media posts. No final confrontations. I simply stopped. I stopped texting first. Stopped calling. Stopped explaining. Stopped hoping that if I found the perfect words, someone would finally understand. For the first time in years, all my energy went where it should have been going all along. To Liam. A few weeks later, I took him on a small weekend trip. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet lake, 2 hours away. A tiny cabin with peeling paint and an old wooden dock stretching over still water. We roasted marshmallows at night. Watched stars appear one by one. Liam spent hours sketching strange machines in a notebook. At one point he looked up from his drawing and smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in months. "This is the best weekend ever, Mom." The words nearly broke me, because it cost less than one night at the resort I'd canceled. And yet it gave him something that expensive vacation never could. Peace. Meanwhile, Michelle continued telling her version of the story, through cousins and distant relatives. I heard bits and pieces. Apparently, I was unstable. Apparently, I had cut off my entire family because of a harmless joke. Apparently, Liam was strange, and I encouraged it. I didn't defend myself. People who wanted the truth knew where to find me. Most never bothered. Summer became fall. The leaves began changing. Life settled into a rhythm. And then everything changed again. It happened late in September. I was answering emails in my office when my phone rang. The screen showed my Uncle Greg's name. My stomach tightened immediately. Uncle Greg never called during work hours. He usually texted. I answered. His voice sounded strange. Careful. Measured. "Evelyn, there's been an accident." For a second my mind jumped to my parents. Then he said Michelle's name. The room seemed to go quiet around me. I listened as he explained. Rain. A slippery road. A soccer tournament. A loss of control near an intersection. The children were shaken but safe. Michelle wasn't. I asked what hospital she was in. There was a pause. Then he told me she'd already undergone emergency surgery. Her spine had been severely injured. The doctors weren't sure whether she'd ever walk again. I remember ending the call and sitting on the floor. Just sitting there, staring at nothing, trying to process it. I felt many things. Shock, sadness, disbelief. But not satisfaction. Not even a little. Michelle had hurt me. She had hurt my son. But I never wanted this. I never wanted tragedy. 2 days later, my mother finally texted. "Michelle is stable. Kids are okay. We'll update when we know more." No greeting. No emotion. No acknowledgement that I was her daughter too. Just information. Like I was receiving a weather report. A week passed. Then another. The next message arrived late one evening. "Michelle needs intensive rehabilitation. Insurance won't cover everything. Costs are very high." I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Because I knew exactly what the message meant. It wasn't information. It was preparation. The beginning of a request nobody wanted to make directly. That night I sat at my kitchen table long after Liam went to bed. The house was silent. My eyes drifted toward the driveway, toward my car, a beautiful dark blue SUV. The first major purchase I'd ever made entirely for myself. I had saved for years, worked weekends, skipped vacations, poured everything into my company until I could finally afford it. It represented freedom, independence, proof that all those exhausting years meant something. The next morning I listed it for sale. Nobody knew. Not my parents. Not Michelle. Not even Uncle Greg. A week later it was gone. The money landed in my account. I stared at the balance for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. I called the rehabilitation facility. The woman who answered transferred me twice before I reached the billing department. He gave Michelle's name, her case number. Then I paid every outstanding balance, 6 months in advance, enough to secure her place in the program, enough to give her a real chance. When the representative thanked me and asked what relationship I had to the patient, I hesitated. Then I answered, "Sister." The word felt strange, heavy, complicated. I asked them not to tell anyone who made the payment. Then I hung up. For several days, nothing happened. Life continued. I drove an older borrowed car, packed lunches, helped Liam with homework, pretended everything was normal. Then one evening my phone buzzed. A text from Michelle. "Why would you do this?" I stared at the screen. Didn't answer. A few minutes later, another message arrived. "I treated you terribly. I treated Liam worse. Why would you help me?" Still, I didn't respond. 3 days later she called. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear faint hospital noises in the background. Machines humming, distant footsteps, a cart rolling somewhere down a hallway. Then Michelle finally spoke. "I didn't think you'd pick up." Neither did I. I wasn't sure I would. Silence. Then a shaky breath. And suddenly, she started crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. No performance. No audience. Just quiet tears. The kind that come from somewhere deep. She told me about the surgery. The fear. The endless nights, staring at hospital ceilings. The possibility that she might spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. She told me our parents had emptied much of their savings trying to help. Her husband was exhausted. The children were scared. Everything felt like it was collapsing. Then she said something I never expected. "I thought you'd hate me." I didn't answer. She continued anyway. "I thought if anyone deserved to walk away from me, it was you." The tears returned. And for the first time in years, I heard no bitterness in her voice. No arrogance. No superiority. Only exhaustion. Then she mentioned Liam. The conversation changed immediately. Her voice grew quieter. "More fragile." I keep thinking about that dinner. I closed my eyes. The one where I humiliated him. She said the words herself. No excuse. No minimizing. No pretending it was a joke. I remember his face, Evelyn. The silence that followed hurt. Because I remembered it too. Every detail. She told me that after the accident, she'd replayed that moment over and over. Sometimes in the middle of the night. Sometimes during physical therapy. Sometimes while staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She remembered her children laughing. Remembered encouraging it. Remembered enjoying it. And now she couldn't understand how she'd become that person. Then came the confession that struck me hardest. She said needing help had changed everything. For the first time in her life, she understood what vulnerability felt like, what helplessness felt like, what it felt like to be dependent on other people, to wonder whether they would show kindness or cruelty. And she realized that Liam had been carrying those feelings long before she ever ended up in a hospital bed. By the time she finished talking, neither of us had much left to say. Then quietly, almost nervously, she asked something. "Someday, when he's ready, could I talk to Liam? Not today. Not next week. Someday." I thought about my son sitting at home drawing robots. About all the years he'd endured comments and laughter. About how hard he had worked to feel safe again. Finally I answered. "He's happy now." Michelle sniffled softly. "I know, and I'm not going to let anyone take that away from him. I understand. For the first time in my life, I believed she actually did. The call ended without dramatic promises. No speeches. No instant réconciliation. Just silence. And strangely, that made it feel real. That night, I sat alone on my porch. The air was cool. Leaves rustled in the darkness. For months, I'd been carrying anger like a stone inside my chest. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted acknowledgement. Someone to admit what happened. Someone to admit Liam deserved better. For the first time, that burden felt lighter. I wasn't ready to forgive Michelle. Not yet. But for the first time, I could imagine a future where forgiveness might someday be possible. I had no idea that the hardest part of the story was still ahead. The weeks after that phone call passed slowly. For the first time in a long time, there was no fighting. No accusation. No family drama exploding across text messages. Just distance. And strangely, that distance felt healthy. Michelle remained in rehabilitation. Every now and then, I received updates from the facility confirming payments and reporting progress. Tiny improvements. Small victories. The kind that wouldn't mean much to most people. A few extra minutes standing. A little more strength in her legs. A slightly longer walk between therapy stations. Hope? Real hope. Michelle didn't call again right away. I think she understood something now that she hadn't understood before. Healing couldn't be rushed. Not physical healing. Not emotional healing. Not the kind of damage she'd spent years creating. A few days after our conversation, my mother texted, "Have you spoken to Michelle?" I replied with a single word. "Yes." An hour later, she answered, "I'm glad you're acting like family again." I stared at the message for a long time. Acting like family. The phrase made something twist inside me. Because where had that family been when Liam stood holding his plate? Where had that family been when Michelle mocked him? Where had that family been when everyone laughed? Where had that family been when they excluded us from gatherings and pretended we didn't exist? I typed several responses. Deleted all of them. Eventually, I put my phone down. There was nothing left to explain. The truth was simple. My parents still didn't understand. Maybe they never would. A few weeks later, I opened my front door and found a cardboard box sitting on the porch. No return address. No note. Just a box. I carried it inside. Liam was at school. The house was quiet. When I opened it, I found a photo album. Old photographs filled every page. Michelle and me as children. Birthday parties. Family vacations. School concerts. Christmas mornings. Pieces of a life that felt impossibly distant. I slowly turned the pages. There was a picture of Michelle holding my hand on my first day of school. Another of us building a blanket fort in our parents' living room. Then, a photo of her holding baby Liam, smiling, looking genuinely happy. Not competitive. Not bitter. Just my sister. Tucked inside the back cover was a folded, handwritten letter. I recognized her handwriting immediately. The letter wasn't dramatic. There were no grand declarations. No demands for forgiveness. Just honesty. She wrote that she wasn't asking for a second chance. She wasn't asking me to forget. She wasn't even asking me to trust her. She simply wanted me to remember there had once been a version of her that loved me. A version that existed before years of jealousy and resentment slowly poisoned everything. Then, she wrote something that caught me completely off guard. She reminded me how she used to braid my hair before elementary school. I actually laughed when I read that. Because I had forgotten. Completely forgotten. Yet the memory came rushing back instantly. Her standing behind me every morning. Both of us late for school. Both of us arguing while she fixed my hair. For the first time in years, I found myself mourning the sister I had lost. Not the woman Michelle became. The girl she used to be. That evening, Liam found the album on the kitchen table. He climbed into a chair and started flipping through it. After a few minutes, he pointed to a photograph. "Who's this?" I looked. Michelle was holding him as a baby. "That's Aunt Michelle." He studied the picture, then looked at me. "Do we still talk to her?" The question hit harder than I expected, because children always find the simplest way to expose complicated truths. "Not very much," I said carefully, "but maybe someday." He nodded, accepted the answer, then returned to his drawings. No anger, no bitterness, just curiosity. Sometimes children are wiser than adults. 4 months after the accident, Michelle called again. This time her voice sounded different. Stronger, healthier, more confident. She told me she had completed her first rehabilitation program. She could walk short distances using assistance. Not far. Not easily. But she was walking. She talked about physical therapy. The frustration. The setbacks. The tiny victories nobody else understood. I listened. Then she grew quiet. Evain. Yeah. I'd like to see you. The request hung in the air. She quickly added more. Not to fix everything. Not to pretend the past never happened. Not to force forgiveness. She simply wanted to show Liam she was trying. I didn't answer immediately. Part of me was still protective. Still cautious. Still remembering that dinner table. I'll think about it. She accepted the answer. No pressure. No guilt. No manipulation. A few days later, while Liam worked on a drawing, I asked casually, if Aunt Michelle visited someday, how would you feel about that? He shrugged. Maybe okay. That was all. Maybe okay. Coming from Liam, that was enormous. A few weeks later, Michelle came over. The visit wasn't dramatic. There were no tears. No emotional speeches. No movie-style reconciliation. Just a quiet afternoon. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her. She stood behind a walker. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Simple clothes. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. Like life had sanded away all the arrogance she'd carried for years. Liam sat on the living room floor drawing. Michelle didn't rush toward him. Didn't force conversation. She simply sat down carefully on the couch. What are you working on? Liam glanced up. A cleaning robot. Oh? It uses lasers. Michelle smiled. That's brilliant. He looked at her for several seconds, studying her, trying to decide whether she was safe. Then he returned to his drawing. 5 minutes later, he walked into his room. Michelle watched him go. I understand, she said quietly. I believed her. She stayed less than 30 minutes. Then she left. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. After that, she started visiting once a week. Always respectful. Always patient. Never pushing. Never demanding. Sometimes Liam barely spoke. Sometimes they talked about books. Sometimes they talked about robots. Sometimes they simply sat in the same room. Slowly, almost invisibly, trust began to grow. Not because Michelle asked for it, because she earned it. One visit at a time. One conversation at a time. One consistent action at a time. Months passed. Then one afternoon, something happened. Liam finished a drawing, walked across the room, and handed it directly to Michelle, without being asked, without encouragement, without hesitation. I saw her eyes fill with tears. Real tears. The kind that appear when you understand the value of something you've nearly lost forever. She carefully folded the drawing, held it like it was priceless. And maybe it was, because trust is priceless, especially when you've broken it yourself. My parents eventually learned I had paid for Michelle's rehabilitation. I never told them. Someone else did. Neither of them thanked me. Not once. Surprisingly, it didn't hurt anymore. For most of my life, I'd been chasing approval I was never going to receive. Now, I understood something important. Their approval wasn't my responsibility. Their understanding wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was Liam, protecting him, teaching him that kindness matters. But so do boundaries. Maybe even more. For years I confused forgiveness with tolerance. I thought being loving meant accepting whatever people did. I thought family deserved unlimited access to us simply because they were family. Now I knew better. The night Michelle humiliated my son changed everything. At the time, it felt like destruction. But looking back, it was also freedom. That moment forced me to stop pretending. Forced me to see what had been happening all along. Forced me to choose my son over family expectations. And because of that choice, both of us became stronger. Today, Michelle walks. She still limps sometimes. She still has difficult days. She still lives with pain. But she's moving forward. She volunteers at Liam's school library once a month. The two of them aren't especially close. Not yet. Healing takes longer than hurting. But sometimes, I hear them laughing together. And every time I do, I feel something unexpected. Not triumph. Not relief. Gratitude. Because Michelle learned a lesson most people never learn. Cruelty leaves scars long after the laughter ends. And forgiveness isn't something you're owed. It's something you earn. Slowly, patiently, one honest choice at a time. As for me, I finally learned something too. Love doesn't require sacrificing your dignity. Compassion doesn't require abandoning your boundaries. And protecting the people you love is never selfish, especially when that person is your child. The little boy who once stood silently holding a plate now knows something I wish I had learned much earlier. The people who truly love you don't ask you to accept mistreatment in exchange for belonging. And sometimes the strongest act of love is simply saying, "Enough."